Hello everyone, welcome to the WayWORD Festival and welcome virtually to Aberdeen. So this festival is brought to you by the Word Centre for Creative Writing with the generous support of Creative Scotland and the University of Aberdeen. And for this event specifically, I'd also like to thank the support of the University of Aberdeen Anthropological Society. So I'm Helena Eiffel and I'm a lecturer here at the university, and we're very delighted to have Leslie Creer here to provide BSL interpretation for us today, and she should be visible to you throughout the event. We also have live captions from Louise Pepper. Thank you very much, Louise. And so if you want to enable closed captions, you can see them at the bottom of your screen. Just click on the CC button on your Zoom toolbar. So I'd also like to introduce my co-chair, Sakshi Arya. She's a recent postgraduate student in creative writing here at the university, and I'm just going to hand over to her for a moment to explain the format of the event to you.
Yes, thank you for the welcome, Helena, and welcome to the Cultural Translations panel, everyone. First, we will be having short readings from our three authors in the event, and the order will be first Avni, and then Raman, and then Preti. And then we will have a brief discussion between them and Helena. And after that, during the last 15 minutes, I'll step back and give the audience a chance for a Q&A with the panelists. But you can think about your questions throughout the event and pop them in the Q&A box, and I'll come back to them. And Helena will now be introducing the event and the panelists.
Thanks, Sakshi. Okay, so this event is about cultural translation. And so we're not just thinking about what happens when a text is translated from one language into another. I think we'll definitely touch on that, but we're really going to discuss how creative writers produce work which crosses cultures, which represents cultures and languages and experiences, which some of their readers might not be familiar with. And we're going to hopefully also talk a bit about how creative works can be received and embraced cross-culturally by readers and publishers. And this brings me to our three fantastic award-winning authors, and I'm absolutely delighted to have them here today and to be able to talk to them about their work. So we're going to go in alphabetical order. Avni Doshi was born in New Jersey. She lives in Dubai. Her first novel, Burnt Sugar, was originally released in India under the title Girl in White Cotton, and it has been published in 26 languages. It won the 2021 Sushila Devi Award and was shortlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize, amongst many other listings. Rama Mander is an Indian-born director, writer, artist, and activist and playwright who is based in Shetland and Glasgow. She's published the poetry collections Lovers, Liars, Thieves, and Conjurers and Thieves, and also a choreographer's cartography. She's produced the play The Algebra of Freedom, and she's also the editor of Incoming, Some Shetland Voices, amongst lots of other writing as well. And she has performed and exhibited her artwork around the world, from Aberdeen to Zimbabwe. Preti Taneja is a writer and activist. Her novel, We That Are Young, revisions King Lear in a modern Indian setting, and it won the 2018 Desmond Elliott Prize and was listed for numerous awards. It's been translated into 7 languages, and Preti teaches creative writing at Newcastle University. And her new book, Aftermath, on the language of trauma, terror, prison and abolition, is going to be published in 2021 as part of the Undelivered Lectures series from Transit Books. Okay, with that brief introduction, which doesn't really do justice to how great these authors are, I'm going to ask them now to give a short reading from their works, just so that we can get a sense of their writing and start thinking about some of these themes of cultural translation. So Avni, can I ask you to go first? Welcome.
Sure, thank you. My mother sets an eggplant alight on the stove, and we watch the flames feed on its purple skin. The beige flesh inside is smoking. She separates the seeds and throws them in the bin. It's a marvel her fingers don't burn. On a white plastic board, she chops chilies and young green onions. The board is stained with turmeric, and there is still a little earth stuck in the rounds of onion stalk, but she tells me not to nitpick about small things. She fries cumin seeds in oil and pours them on top of the steaming eggplant, followed by torn leaves of coriander. Oil splatters on the side of the stove. I cough while mixing the contents of the bowl. My maid Ela straightens her sari and sighs. She begins the work of cleaning our mess while we bring out the dishes to where Dilip sits at the dining table. Ma doesn't come to our house often. She says the main hall disturbs her, especially the mirrors that cover each wall, reflecting everything in multiple directions. For Dilip, the mirrors were a selling point when he was house hunting, a sign that he'd made it, and the culmination of every fantasy he had about mirrors and pornographic films. For my mother, the room is too alive, with each object and body replicated 4 times, with each replication repeated further in reflection. She sits down at the table and her feet jump nervously, climbing on one another like mice escaping the midday heat. For myself, I've got used to the mirrors, have even started relying on them when Dilip and I fight, because seeing a reflection shout is similar to watching television. So Mum, Dilip says, how are you feeling? He calls my mother Mum like he calls his own. I struggled in the beginning, but it was easy for him, calling 2 women Mum and calling 2 places home. My mother tries to speak in an American accent when Dilip is around. She thinks he won't understand her otherwise, and if he tries to speak in Hindi, she replies in English. Ma attempts his Midwestern vowels and confident pauses, which assume the rest of the world will wait for him to finish a sentence. Honestly, beta, when the doctor gave me the news, I started to fear the worst. I even started making plans to take my own life. You can ask her, isn't it true? Sorry, I'm not trying to upset your meal. Eat first, eat first. We'll talk later. How is the auntie? Not too spicy, I hope. Yes, to answer your question, I was scared at first, but now I don't think I'm really sick. I feel very fine. Dilip nods and looks into the mirror ahead of him. I'm so happy to hear that. Ma, the doctor says you're forgetting. My scans were normal. Yes, scans can be normal, even though, why are you going on insisting I'm ill? She is holding a slice of raw onion in her hand. It drops back to her plate as she speaks. You're forgetting things. You're forgetting how to do things, basic things, like using your mobile phone and paying the electricity bill. Oh, I never really knew how to pay the bill. These online things are too confusing. I put my hands down. She hadn't said this to the doctor. And what about calling Kali Mata? You asked me to dial the number of a person who's been dead for 10 years. 7 years, Ma says, and she turns to Dilip. See how she lies? Dilip looks between us. When he frowns, a scar from an old lacrosse injury glimmers on his temple. I'm not lying. You are, that's what you do. You're a professional liar. We drop Ma home after dinner and Dilip hums to himself quietly. I can't make out the tune, so I interrupt him. Can you believe what she was saying? He pauses and then answers, maybe she doesn't believe she's sick. She has to believe it. You aren't an authority. It stings that my lack is so visible. I didn't say I was an authority. The doctor says she's sick. I thought the doctor said she has the brain of a young woman, but she's forgetting things. Important to whom? Maybe she wants to forget. Maybe she doesn't want to remember her friend is dead. Either way, she's forgetting. I hear my tone has turned shrill. Voluntarily forgetting is not the same as dementia, Anthara. That doesn't make any sense. Why would she want to forget me? Dilip takes a breath and shakes his head. You're the artist. Be open to possibilities. She called me a liar. Well, isn't that what you make art about? About how people can't be trusted? His face has dropped. He looks disappointed. I try to match his look, but don't feel it. So I bite the nail on my middle finger, or more accurately, the cuticle area. Dilip reaches out his hand and brings my arm down.
Fantastic, thank you. It's a great way to start this event. Okay, after Avni, can I ask Raman to take the floor?
Yes, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm going to start by reading Her Third Eye Was Erased at Birth. So I'm just letting Leslie and Louise know in case they want to find the link I sent them. Smudged away by blind sage, fingers intent on keeping her locked into position, fixed into being, trapped into ways of seeing. Trapped into ways of seeing that were blind and sore as pimples, that later emerged, hormonal braille that later erupted like little bulbous blind volcanoes, rounded, scarlet like the throats of exotic birds that trill and song, throats comic, ballooning, for sex, for need, for want, signaling, blind desire to assimilate, recreate, procreate. This is blind hope. This is a leap. Thelma and Louise, let's keep going, let's keep going, let's. But the invited fingertips cannot feel the tenderness of your skin. They cannot feel, they are melanin blind. Oblivious to the labor, they erase geology and flatten the topography of your body. They disappear your present, snag at the keratosis pilaris that dot to dots across your body. A crated astronomical epidermis, the tight hair, coiled, raging, trapped beneath the same hair to be shorn, ripped from the root to shape, to smooth a root, to want, to desire, to need. I am woman. I am woman, strip me down. Pour hot wax, epilate, tweeze and shave girlhood me. Make me easier to read. Take away my bite. Make me less feral. Make me less here. I stand before you. Nothing special, nothing to worry, nothing to harry. I am cancelled. Teeth bared. Look, I'm not a threat. Let me in, let me pass. From the periphery, from the margins, from the shurmal, from the horizon, from the impasse. Listen, keep the chai and the yoga, the pajamas, the bathing and shampoo, the Ayurvedics and the spices and the curry. I give them, keep them, take them, but recognize me. Ears pinned back, ears prunket, ears poised, tongue slavering, tongue gibberish, tongue raging outstretched. Any similarities with Kali are purely accidental. Besides, I don't have the arms to hold the weight of your vision, and your reflection stuns me. I'm barely here. Look, I'm neither here nor there. Thank you. And I'm going to read a wee extract from an essay that I wrote about the power of unbelonging and the phrase "not quite right for us" that often writers of colour receive from editors as a rejection letter. Not quite right for us is the upper caste moneyed South Asian who has no experience of being without financial stability or privilege within South Asian culture, who can gain traction in Western society and enter at a certain level, typically a person with education and some social capital behind them, someone who can approximate a clean version of the norm in action and presentation of values. They move closer to the us. Their version of the them narrative, the dispossessed story, is poignantly pitched. It meets the ears of the norm as a form of harmless entertainment, as a manageable multicultural intervention. Tales of wild elephants, coal-lined eyes, silk saris and the perfect monsoon mango of exoticized brown bodies moving to a Kathak or Bharatanatyam beat. Think poised brown Bohemian, Brahmin or high society Karachi, Lahori, Dhaka, Colombo writers who offer beautifully crafted, curated versions of the South Asian experience through a privileged lens, or a mediated soft focus version of less palatable realities. Not quite right for us is dog whistle politics in action, sucking the oxygen out of the room. It's an unquestioning belief in the capitalist system, despite its destruction of our planet. It diminishes the opportunity for any dialogue. Not quite right for us rolls off the tongue, but racism is inherent in the phrase. Take a moment to consider who defines right and what that means. Rightness being the norm is in the context of race, fundamentally an approximation of whiteness. Rightness is measured in proximity to whiteness. This is where the violence of the phrase is most apparent. It is the one place, hopefully, you won't be gaslit. The statistics say it all. Surely this reality cannot be denied. Compounded by the enforced failure of imagination, nurtured from birth, so that young people of colour have to work tenfold to imagine themselves in positions of power or holders of knowledge, pioneers of science, or generally just as successful in life in their own terms. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And finally, last but not least, can we move on to Preti?
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. I'm Preti, Taneja, and I'm going to read from We That Are Young, which is my novel. It's a translation of Shakespeare's King Lear set in contemporary India. For those of you who know the play, you'll recognise this scene. It's where a great storm is taking place, and so it's coming from right in the middle of the book. The scene really is about a young, very wealthy man who is masquerading as a poor man, a guru, in the slum of a place called Neprathala, which is an imagined space, and he's having a hallucination. The book is a real critique of rising Indian fascism and imperial history, and so you'll hear some of that in what I'm about to read as Jeet, or Rudra, has his terrible vision. I cannot survive on nothing. No one can. However much he tries, he wants. He begins to sob. Bapuji rocks him gently. Shh, shh. Be a good boy, Jeet thinks to himself in the basti. Say nothing, chup chup. Let the rain come again. Let it wash all of life away. Rain falls in a light sheen over everything. It drips through the holes in Jeet's plastic roof. It washes his face as he tries to look up. He sees Bapuji so clearly, every line on his face, every pigment mark. The man he thinks he has worshipped all his life is really there, looking at him with pity. Jeet thinks he says, "Dat Tvam Asi," but he cannot be sure. Then the fever takes over. Jeet remembers little after that, until night comes, the second after the storm, and Bapuji is in some new sort of frenzy. He tears at his filthy kurta, his diamond studs fall off. Jeet scrabbles for them, but Bapuji kicks them onto the sewer. He rents at his shawl and drops it in the mud. Legs tremble, arms ache, but Rudra raises himself up and falls on it. He wraps it between his legs and around his hips. Nanu wakes up from her corner, a bundle of torn chiffon and sodden papier-mâché skin, as if she is waiting to be formed. She tries to stop him, calling to Bapuji not to allow a madman to wear his clothes, not to turn the world ulta sida upar niche, risk each becoming the other. He feels Nanu's hands grab at him and slap him, his limbs twist with fever. He retreats to a corner, stroking his new covering, nursing himself. We that believe in India shining, he whispers it into his shawl. We that believe we are better than all others. We that are the youngest, the fastest, the democracy, the economy, the future technology of the world, the global superpower coming soon to a cinema near you. We, Hum Panch, that are the 5 cousins of the 5 great rivers, everybody our brother, sister, lover. We that are divine, the echo of the ancient heroes of the old times. We that fight, we that love, we that are hungry, so hungry, we that are young. We that are jigging on the brink of ruin, we that are washed in the filth of corruption. Jal so what, aise hota hai. We that are a force of all that is natural, slow, death to Muslims' gaze, chi-chi, women in their skin tights high. We that sit picnicking on the edge of our crumbling civilization. We that party with shots and more shots, as the world burns beneath us, as the dogs bark, as the cockroaches crow, as the old eat their young and the young whip their elders, all wearing the birth masks of respect. We that present only the shadows of ourselves behind our painted smiles. We that protest for the right to drink whiskey sours served to our beds at noon. We that eat our beef with chopsticks. We that twist tongues to suit our dear selves. We that worship the ancient religion of Lakshmi, of Shiva, wealth creation and ultimate destruction. We that will be born strong in the next life and in a party that never ends. We that are the future of this planet. We that begin with this beloved India will endure. Yes, it all belongs to us and we will eat it all. All of it is ours. We that are India, no longer slaves. We that are young. Who do you think you are? Nanu says. Where? This is the world where pundits take bribes for blessings. Do not shiver. When thieves don't come to the market, when Gandus and Hijras get married in Krishna Mandirs, then Hamara Apne India will shine, hey? Somewhere it rains every day, whether you feel it in your palace or not. Thank you.
It's fantastic. It's a great scene. Thank you so much, everybody, for your readings. And I think you've already kind of touched on, just brought up some of the themes and the ideas that we're going to talk about for the rest of this session. So I'm now going to give you a few questions and we'll just kind of see where it takes us. So I want to start to begin with by asking you about your kind of creative process and what kinds of cultural translation you think are at work in your different types of writing. And also maybe if you could say something about what kind of issues you consciously consider when you're writing for a particular audience and an audience who might not know the culture that you're actually writing about, or when you're trying to write for audiences from lots of different backgrounds. So I was thinking, Preti, you're taking the very well-known plot for some readers of King Lear, and then you're transferring it to a modern Indian setting. So that's just one example of this kind of cultural translation. Would you like to say a bit more about that?
Sure. I call this book a translation of King Lear because it really is to do with taking something from one source or two sources and bringing it together to make bringing those two things together to make a third thing. So this is not an appropriation. It's not a kind of Empire Speaks Back kind of project. It's not an adaptation. It's very much taking the language and form of a play. For those of you who know the play very well, you'll have heard some of those linguistic echoes in the passage that I read. So this idea of nothingness, the rain, it raineth every day, which is what the passage ends with. That's a song, one of Shakespeare's songs, and so on. So there's a real intertextual weaving in the book of Shakespeare's language, which forms a kind of translation into the way in which these characters in this world think and speak, because of the imperial project, which took Shakespeare to India and wanted to kind of civilize the natives with soft power, which is basically, you know, a single shelf of a good European library is worth all the literature of England and Arabia, which is that very famous quote from Macaulay's Minute on Indian Education from 1835. And for me, you know, I was born in Britain and I grew up here. So I'm, I suppose, what's called second generation. But my parents came from India in the 60s and settled here in England. And so for me, it wasn't really a question of writing a novel for anybody. I never write with a reader in mind. I simply just don't want to assume knowledge of any particular reader. I think it's insulting to the reader, actually. And I think, you know, if you have the confidence of your own convictions, if you feel like you have something that you have to translate about the experience you have about the world and the knowledge that you have about the world and the multiplicity you carry inside you linguistically and culturally, you can bring that to bear on your writing if it suits the story that you want to tell. In my case, it completely did. So as that second generation British Asian person, for me to translate Shakespeare's King Lear to India felt like a very natural process. This is not something that was, it sort of just comes onto the page exactly as it should linguistically. The novel includes a lot of textual references to Indian sacred texts, other people's novels, from American Psycho to Jane Smiley's A Thousand Acres, as well as the Shakespeare, as well as poets like Kabir. And so, you know, there isn't another reader who's going to pick up on all those references, but there is something for any reader. And that's really what the form of this particular book allowed me, which was really exciting to do.
That's really great, thank you. Avni or Raman, I don't know if either of you would like to pick up on that.
Do you want to go, Avni? I'm happy to wait.
Please go ahead.
I suppose I consider the act of making and creating almost an act of also creating a prism through which to refract lived experience and refract cultural experience and refract language as well. So for me, that the text is an embodiment of that, of a possibility of a new way of seeing, a new way of relating, and the sorts of texture that I'm interested in, that I like to bring to my work. And I work in different mediums. I publish poetry, I've published short stories, long and short fiction, and I write essays as well, and create work for theatre. And for me, the sorts of textures I'm interested in are the small moments, and also the way, trying to ensure that, you know, that there isn't sort of a monument of South Asianness that's being adhered to. You know, I want to tear that down, because I think there's we are multitudes. We are not this one, you know, one way of seeing and one way of being. And things like caste is really important to me. For me as a working class woman, it's really important to me to make sure that that is a lens on my work, and also being queer and being from a culture that you know, where queerness has been oppressed through colonization as well, and making the difference between the way that the West and, say, the European or Western way of seeing queerness is very different from the way that I relate to my queerness. And it's the same with disability as well. You know, all these different lenses and different identities that I am, the way that, you know, that's viewed here is very different from the way that I interpolate that with my lived experience.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to turn my mic back on. Avni, would you like to add anything?
In terms of my process, I think, yeah, I definitely don't have a reader or any particular audience in mind. For the longest time, I didn't think, you know, my book would ever be published or see the light of day. So it was impossible to imagine anything beyond the actual process of sitting down and writing. I guess if anything, I felt a kind of responsibility to the character, to the narrator, to kind of, I felt like I almost built a relationship with the narrator through the writing of the book. And so I felt a responsibility to be true to who she was and the way she spoke and the way she experienced the world. And that was in these different languages and various registers of, you know, and also the particularities of her experience. My own family, my parents came to the US in the 70s, and I was born in the US and raised there. And every year we would go to India and spend a lot of time. And it was very strange to be there. I at once felt like deeply at home, surrounded by family in a way that I was often alienated in the US. But at the same time, I felt deeply foreign. And I think in a way that was something I tried to, you know, I tried to look at that and kind of explore that through the character of Dilip, the husband, who is, you know, Indian American, and he's kind of returned to India in his 20s and 30s and is living there now. So he has this experience of, you know, at once kind of returning to this notion, some kind of idea of a mother country, and at the same time being completely apart from it. And that's actually a source of conflict for the two main characters in Burnt Sugar, where they're on this kind of contested ground of what Indianness is and what it means to be an outsider. And I think that is something I was sort of navigating through the writing of the book.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't actually put my camera on, but as long as you can hear me, that's all you need. This is really, really interesting. And I think what I'm picking up from all of you in different ways is actually the richness of experience that you managed to put into your work is coming from your own sense of identity, but also a real focus on being honest to the writing that you're doing in the moment, rather than thinking about how you're going to be accepted by particular readers. And then that leads to writing for a broader range of readers, and they get a better experience for that. I did want to, you've already started talking about themes of kind of feeling like an insider or an outsider, or how you define a particular identity. And I did want to talk a bit more about this. So Raman, in your the essay that you actually read from, where you reflect upon the idea of, oh, there's my video, it's back, I'm here, okay, where you're actually talking about the phrase "not quite right for us," and the many meanings that can carry, often quite negative meanings of exclusion, and saying you're not quite good enough, or you're not quite fitting the norm enough. But you also say how this can be an opportunity and a creative challenge, and it gives people freedom to kind of move beyond what is expected of the norm and to do something else. So Raman first, but then hopefully all of you, could you say something about the kind of the challenges and the possibilities that you see in creating work which does cross cultures and cross different social groups?
Well, what with the essay that you're referring to, I eventually end up with this idea of the liminality of otherness, which I think can be a really productive space. And the way that I connect with all this is, so actually it's interesting, there's a lot of conversation around this right now. Michaela Cole, for example, has just created a wee book, has just written a book called Misfits, and I think that would be another way of looking at what I'm saying as well, that actually there's strength in being an outsider, because I certainly, it's not about wanting to become the mainstream, to become the them or the us. It's actually about the right to be the multitudes that I am in any way that I want to be, and that I can that I kind of have autonomy over that. And that's also rendered in my use of language, and the fact that I will draw from Shetland dialect, will draw from Scots, will draw from Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, even though, they may not be my mother tongues. I'm obviously, I'm using English as a second language, because when I first arrived in the UK, English was not my first language. It's all of this. It's like, for me, it's, I think it's about the act of creating on the fly as well, because I just feel like that there's more, I think the position that I've been placed in because of history, because of, society, because of capitalism, because of the colonial experiment, all of that creates a certain context for the way that I dialogue, that I kind of relate to the world. And I want to bring the nuances of that to the work that I make. And I think being in a liminal space, being in that kind of slightly off-center misfit place can be a very liberating and fruitful place. And it certainly has been for me. And in the essay, I'm very much talking about, yes, this is the place where often you feel you're being pushed into, but what about if we choose it? What happens if we actually choose that place and write from that place and create from that place? And I'm really interested about the strength in that, and how we can offer ourselves and move towards. It's not really, the word translation, I'm not interested in translating myself really for anyone. I'm interested in the dialogue with myself, I suppose, because I feel I'm a pioneer in myself, because I haven't read work that speaks to my lived experience in the same way. So I feel there's a real radical act, actually, of claiming and sorting on my own terms and creating a new vocabulary and a new lexicon. And yeah, it's a playful process.
Thank you. I really like that idea of liminality as a potential for liberation and kind of freeing yourself. Thank you very much. Avni, would you like to, have you got anything to say about these kind of challenges and possibilities in cultural translation?
Yeah, as I was listening to Raman talk, I was struck by the kind of courage in what she was saying, because I think when I was growing up and I was in school, I wasn't reading very many South Asian authors, and I never really saw myself in literature. And I think when I was in school, there was this push for a kind of universality, which I think was actually a kind of whitewashing. And there was a way of talking about literature as purely universal, and you could place yourself in anyone's shoes and you could inhabit that world. But they didn't ever take into account the idea of representation, of how important it is to see yourself in literature, to see characters that sound like you or look like you, or that are kind of facing the same problems as you, or Raman mentioned this liminal space, that are kind of existing in a liminal space. I didn't read many books like that, and so I think for a long time it was hard to imagine that I could write a book, or that I would write a book. Even though I would kind of write in secret. There was a way that I wanted to hide it because I was ashamed of it. Maybe I just didn't see it mirrored anywhere, and I think that's, I realize now how important it is, and even if you have mentors or people who you can turn to in your community who look like you and who are interested in doing creative work, that can be a kind of guide, that can be a kind of portal, I think so.
And of course, now you are writing those books and people are reading them, and then that is going to inspire them to go on and write their own, hopefully. Thank you very much. Preti, would you like to add anything?
I think, hearing Raman and Avni speak about this, I think it's always a wonderful experience for me to be in a platform with other South Asian women, because it makes me realize just how similar our experiences are, no matter which parts of South Asia we're from or where in the white world we grew up. Because, this idea that you can be surrounded by a kind of whiteness that impinges on your imagination, it impinges on your tongue, it makes you feel like uncanny in your own body, and it asks you to choose. And until you can learn to push away that feeling that somehow it's inside you to make this decision between these two cultures, when actually you can't, because you are both of them, or three of them, or four of them, or five of them, or however many you carry within you that you decide. You can't cross cultures because you are all of these cultures and you have all of them in you. This novel, We That Are Young, it's a translation of a canonical play. It's the center of Shakespeare's canon, and Shakespeare is at the center of the Western canon. Talking about an India which people don't see in literature that much because it's all very Best Exotic Marigold Hotel a lot of the time. It's not a translation of me. I don't call it that. It's a translation of that play with that culture, of finding these links between power and its worst harms on the people who have the least. And I think, that is not difficult for most of us who don't grow up with money to understand, because we are those people. So crossing cultures on the page isn't what this is, what my practice is doing. What it's doing is placing all these things side by side as they actually exist in the world in a kind of equality, and saying some of these things need to be known together at the same time for us to understand the systemic harms that we are caught within. This is a political act of being. It's a way of making space for yourself. And, you know, I was fascinated that Avni said she didn't think that she was going to get published. I had that experience in this country. It took a very long time for me to find a house for my work. And it makes you, well, certainly for me, the less possible the idea of being published became, the more freeing I found it creatively, because it just meant that I could actually embrace all of the things I wanted to do and say formally in the novel, and not feel like I had to please a kind of way of writing that was very much that was very much popular and still is, a kind of syntactical violence against people who contain many languages.
That's really brilliant. And I'm going to ask you about publishing in a moment. I want to hear more about that. But I do like this idea of challenging the whole notion of cross cultures, and actually what is a more intersectional issue than that. It's more like being within or placed at the crossroads of lots of cultures. There's not one culture there and one culture there, although people might try and enforce that in some sense. That's not people's identities at all. Thank you, everyone. That's really interesting. Does anyone want to add anything before I skip on to the next question? But yeah, I do want to ask you about some of the decisions that actually go into publishing, translating, distribution. So in a sense, these are slightly more practical issues rather than kind of creative or kind of identity issues. But I think obviously those real practical decisions have a big influence on how your work is shared and received. So Avni, for example, I was thinking, as I said in the introduction, in India, Burnt Sugar goes by the title Girl in White Cotton. So just as a starting point, could you maybe say a bit more about the decision behind that and what it means for the book?
So Girl in White Cotton was the original title for the book when I started writing it. Now, I think I started writing it in 2012, towards the end of 2012. So 7 years later, when I finally found an agent who agreed to try and sell it in India, it was still with that title. And I think it worked in the context of India because there was this idea, well, first of all, I should say 7 years later, I had a complicated relationship with the title. I realized even at that point, the book was, in a sense, no longer what it had started as. And even when I sold the book to HarperCollins India, we were already in talks about perhaps changing the title if we could come up with something that fit better. But then I had a conversation with my editor, and he wanted to know why I decided on this particular title. And I spoke to him about the various meanings of the word white cotton in the context of India, this idea of grief, this idea of mourning, the idea of renunciation, of living the life of an ascetic, that coupled with the idea of a girl in white cotton, there's a kind of tension there, something that doesn't quite fit. And he liked that. He kind of responded to that. And so we decided to keep that title. When I finally sold the book in the UK, my editor in the UK, she immediately pointed out that that idea of white cotton would not translate to the average reader in the UK. I wasn't sure how to take that, but then I said, well, this is a chance to educate readers. And she made what I thought was a valid point. She said, you will educate readers with your text. She said, I don't know if the title is the place to educate the reader. So I thought that was quite interesting, and I slept on it for a couple of weeks. I was a little anxious about having two different titles. And then I said, okay, I'm willing to look at other possible titles. And when she came up with a list and I saw burnt sugar as an option, I thought that really works. I'm not particularly, I think when I'm writing, I'm not particularly focused on the title. The title almost seems sometimes to me like an afterthought. I almost think I have trouble getting a sense of the big picture of my work when I'm finished with it after all the different iterations. The thing I found the hardest, actually, I think, in the process of publishing was the changes made in the actual text. I think that, to me, that was maybe more upsetting, and that took me longer to get over. And that was actually something I faced more when I was publishing in India. I think, first of all, in India, we forget, even though people speak perhaps many more languages, than just English and Hindi, there's a kind of elevation of English and then of Hindi. And if you're writing in other languages, then that kind of becomes a little bit problematic if you're mixing in, say, Marathi, Gujarati, and for my character, that was actually how she spoke. She brought in the various, or Punjabi, the various kind of languages of her family, of her larger community, of her husband's family, so there was that issue. And I found it really came up around the idea of food. And we kind of made a decision. I kind of agreed after a long time. My editor said that, how about you can call the dishes by their Hindi name, but the ingredients should be in English. And that was really upsetting. I don't actually know, moving forward, now that I have a greater sense of, maybe now I feel a little more powerful in this world and that I can make demands. I think I felt a little powerless at the time. I kind of said, okay, and it was really difficult because to have a sentence that says, she added turmeric to the dish, it's very different than saying she added haldi to a dish. It changes the sound of the sentence. It changes everything. And so that was really difficult to make some of those decisions. We really had to go word by word. And I let a lot go that in retrospect, maybe I shouldn't have. And I think things might look different in the future also, the next time I write a book, if I ever write another book, I think I'll maybe feel a little more able to put my foot down when I'm uncomfortable with some of those decisions.
I wanted to respond, if I may, because I really think it's really interesting, Avni, what you were saying, and that really difficult situation to be placed in. And I feel like this publishing world really needs to catch up. We're decolonizing now, it's the 21st century, a lot has gone down, and the fact that it's kind of reduced to that kind of level of, for me, it's ridiculous that, that you have to negotiate like that. To be frank, my personal stance, and it's not that I'm not saying that I'm not speaking for anyone except myself, is that I'm not translating for anybody. It's like, this is for me, this is for whoever else gets it. And it's like, God, we live in a world of Google, for God's sake. If there's something that you don't understand, bloody Google it. It's like we also assume an intelligence of the readers. So I feel like the publishing industry are also actually actually, let's break it down. The publishing industry, they don't represent our lived experience. you know, and they don't really represent a lot of lived experience. They're white, middle class, predominantly male, and you know, the conversation that they're initiating when that goes sort of down the route that Avni's talking is actually an echo chamber of themselves. That conversation has got nothing to do with me. And actually what I'm interested in now is having a conversation on my own terms. And that's also what my work is about. And I don't think that we should be put into those difficult situations. And it's also the same with agents as well. I mean, I do think that it's an ongoing struggle, really. And that's what what I'm alluding to in the, in the passage that I read from, that, you know, if an agent takes to work and recognizes, oh yes, this is Salman Rushdie, this is Kamala Shamsi, this is in that vein, or Arundhati Roy, you know, this has got exotic all over it in some way, and you know that you know, I'm riling against that. You know, I'm like, actually, this is my story, this is my fiction, my poetry, my language, my words. It's, you know, I'm not trying to be an echo or a refrain of anyone else. And, you know, and I feel like actually they need to get out more. They need to experience more of life and see that a lot has been going down, and that we're not a monolith, you know, that we have a wide range of experiences and a wide range of cultural sensibilities as well.
I think it's extraordinary, you know, what you're talking about, Avni, and your experience, and I agree with so much that Raman's saying. Like I said, for me, trying to get published in England, where I grew up and was schooled, etc., it was like finally realizing, which is something I had always known, which is, you know, you will hit a glass ceiling at some point with who you are and who you're perceived to be. So when this book went on submission to UK mainstream presses and the well-known independent presses in London here, it was very much like, how dare she do Shakespeare? How does she know King Lear this well? Well, I did it at school like everybody else. How dare, and then, you know, you begin to say, fine, I'm not going to explain that. The novel doesn't translate. It's full of untranslated Hindi, it's full of untranslated Punjabi, it's full of untranslated gibberish. I made up a language called Nepali for the kind of the dream space of it. I didn't want to italicize any of those words, because aesthetically, politically, and ethically, I just don't think I should be explaining or apologizing to any perceived reader who doesn't understand. And yes, you can just go and Google those things. And it's very interesting, you know, when the book came out, this issue of untranslation became quite something that readers reacted to. And some people love it because it gives them a sense of being immersed. If they don't understand those languages, they just go with it. Some people were absolutely outraged and put reviews on those online platforms whereby, you know, it's like, I don't understand this, how dare she write a novel? And the whole kind of idea of how dare she is just exactly what women from brown backgrounds, South Asian backgrounds, writing, reading, being so articulate, does to people. And I think it's quite fascinating. And in the end, I published the novel with a very small press, a high modernist avant-garde press called Galley Beggar Press, which is based in Norwich. And it's basically two people in a room who love literature and put out these books, 2 or 3 books a year. But because of that freedom of the small press ecosystem, I was able to do all of these things, which I'm not sure I would have been able to do if a mainstream house had picked this up. So in the end, I think it worked well for the political project of my own practice.
I think there's a line from Raman's poem which really stuck out to me, which is make me easier to read. And all 3 of you are just like, no, I'm not going to make myself easier to read. You've put the effort in, and read me yourself. I'm going to move quickly on to the Q&A from the audience, because we are going to run out of time and I want to just see what people have to say. Sakshi, would you like to field the questions?
Yes, Thank you so much, but we're running really late, so I'll just read out some questions. The first question is by Ula Usman, and they ask, aren't you afraid of giving wrong answers through cultural translation, especially when you aren't raised in a mother country? And does cultural translation help you find your identity?
Can I give my little take on that?
Yes, sure.
I think the realities are, and in a way I'm riffing off what Preti just said, because it's, you know, I resonated, everything she said resonated with me deeply. You know, the reality is that we as brown women aren't supposed to have a voice at all. So it's like, you know, we're supposed to be just shut up, chup in the corner, you know. The reality is that I should have had an arranged marriage. That's what, you know, that's, my books were taken away from me as a kid, because it's like, you know, you know, why are you bothering? Because it's, you know, this is not going to be your life. So when someone asks a question like that, and I understand that where it's coming from, I just think, you know what, I actually don't care. You know, I'm never going to be right or good enough, or, you know, I'm always going to be the Besharam Guri. You know, I'm always going to be that. And now I wear it as a badge of pride. So bring it on. Yeah, I've got it wrong. So what?
Thank you, Raman. Thank you for the answer. It does resonate with me as well. Would either Preti or Avni you like to go next?
I think she said it brilliantly. So.
Okay. Okay, then I'll ask the other question. That's by some anonymous attendee. They ask, how much do you think you need a South Asian language to write about India? I am Indian heritage, born here, and sadly only have English as a language, but really want to write about the loss of identity and about India, but it kind of feels like fraud compared to other Indian writers.
I'd like to take this one, if I may. First of all, I think what you're saying is really quite vulnerable, and I thank you for your question. And as a writer, I would urge you to embrace that vulnerability. And just remember that you aren't an Indian writer writing in English. You are not that person. You are something else that is undefined. If it has to be defined in the census by passport, you're British Asian. That is where you start from. And if you want to write about the loss of identity, no one can do that better than you, with the knowledge that you have in the world that you want to realize on the page. So just do what you want to do. Just shut the door on all of that, embrace the things that you are, and be yourself as a writer.
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree with what Preti is saying. And also the reality is English is also, because of history, is also an Indian language. And, you know, it carries a lot of weight and violence with it. But it's absolutely valid to explore that on your own terms. And the whole issue of kind of being locked out of other languages, I think it can be a powerful starting point, and also potentially quite a playful place as well, because you know Preti spoke about playing with language and creating new language, and that's also part of what I do as well. And actually, I think you know, lots of writers and artists are constantly taking something that's centered and trying to shift it to the margins, and then mess around with it, doodle with it, and come back and bring it, and then recenter it, and that's part of your job. So what I would really say is, don't wait for someone else to legitimize you. Just do it. You have to legitimize yourselves, you know, yourself. And, you know, certainly, you know, I don't want to speak for the other panelists. I share a kinship with them because I can sense from what they're saying. But I would speak for myself. I had to do this thing on my own. You know, nobody came knocking. Nobody came saying, "Oh, we want to hear about your life and what you have to say." The reality is that you do need to believe in yourself, and to have a degree of tenacity, and to keep going. I mean, you know, I have. You know, you can look me up and see what I have published, but I have lots of things that haven't been published, and I'm desperately looking still. It's a tough industry, because we are, you know, we are swimming in waters of whiteness. That's why, you know, they only recognize themselves, and they only recognize people who mimic themselves as well. So anyone who's not doing that is, you know, has to fight, really has to fight on many levels. It's not just about having access to a platform. It's also about believing in yourself, the mental health stuff around it. It's like, I struggle with that, to be frank. I still struggle with actually feeling okay about being invisible, because frequently I am invisible. I do want to get my work out there, but it's very hard to find space for it. So I want to be frank about that, because it's not easy. And there's also, if you don't have the if you don't come from a place where there's a lot of nourishment, like if you don't come from a culture or a community who values, women writing or women having a word, or women having a say. And that, I actually think that's the whole world, quite frankly, because we live in a patriarchal, world. So I'm not saying that that's the South Asian thing. I think that's the context that we're in. If we're coming from that, then it's really actually, it's miraculous that you get to a place and actually put your words down and make a difference and write. And also, within that is the mix of kind of caste and class. I mean, I'm something that I really am conscious of is that a lot of the narratives that we hear about South Asianness are, middle class or upper class narratives. And that's something that, that's very important to me, that, that we have more of a wider range, and that there's space for all of us.
I'm afraid we're running awfully late, so we'll have to wind this up here. But I am grateful to all of you, Preti, Avni, and Raman, for the wonderful session and for all the food for thought that you've given us. I do hope that brown people actually find a voice in writing even more, and they're not just compared with their contemporaries. So winding this up here, I would like to thank all of you for being present here. And thanks to Helena for chairing the session today. I hope you all enjoyed the session. And if you did, please head to Blackwell's. That is our official university website, bookshop for the books by any of the panelists. I'd also like to take a minute to thank the media services team, the WayWORD Festival folks, Helen, Kirsty, Anais. Thanks to our lovely BSL interpreter, Leslie Crerer, and live captioner, Louise Pepper. And finally, a big thanks to Creative Scotland and University of Aberdeen and the Word Centre for funding today's event. And thanks for the partnership and support of Aberdeen Anthropology Society. Thanks to the audience for joining us, and I hope you had as much fun as I did. And you can follow us on the social media, social media handles. And thanks again.